Well, hello, and thank you very much for tuning into this video today. So this is a video that's going to get me death threats. It's going to get people riled up, but it's important to talk about because I've kind of lived in this space for a wee while, and I've kind of seen a lot of kind of more liberal, kind of left-wing kind of commentators and people that just talk on videos because they enjoy doing it, kind of sidestep this, certainly in the UK, despite the fact that there is actually quite a lot of very good analysis that points out that this Rupert Lowe's Great Gang Inquiry report isn't accurate and is filled with problems, filled with mischaracterizations and misrepresentations, and just lies. It just outright lies at several points, and people have done the analysis to look into it. So that's what we're going to do today. So this comes from a variety of sources, but mostly comes from the Canary online. So let's kind of go over the main details. So on June 16th, Rupert Lowe, the Restore Britain MP, announced publication of a rape gang inquiry report. Now, what he says is that the inquiry report proves that without a doubt there is an undeniable link between religion and rape gangs, Islam. As a country, we need to find the courage to finally say so. Which is a funny statement because I can think of another religion that kind of has been involved in issues of sexual assault and rape, Catholicism. The Catholic Church. But anyway, that's a sidestep for a bit later. And so one thing to bear in mind is, though he used the official language of an inquiry, his endeavour was actually completely crowdfunded. It's subject to no oversight of any kind. And at the time of this video, I believe he is still collecting donations. And likewise, it lacks any of the official powers of an official inquiry. It's unable to compel testimony, and it relies on whatever publicly available data there is, and data that doesn't exist. So the main claim, which is just a complete lie, is this: the scale of crimes committed is staggering. It has been previously estimated that, at very least, 250,000 young white girls have been subjected to repeated rape, gang rape, trafficking, torture, pregnancy, forced Islamic conversions, and lifelong trauma. Now, that 250,000 figure is just a lie. What it comes from is this: it links to a May 2019 parliamentary debate in which Malcolm Pearson of UKIP cited this figure, again without support. And this in turn kind of obscures the fact that Pearson was referring to his own kind of estimates from an earlier debate. He said, "My lords, do the government accept that if we extrapolate," that's the key thing, extrapolate nationally, the J report on Rotherham and other reports from Telford and Oxford, there appear to be upwards of 250,000 young white girls raped in this country, very largely by Muslim men. So this, at very least, is an estimate that's based on one politician's estimate. It comes from nowhere. There are no... that's just a lie. Like, if you're going to issue a report, you can't just go out there with a headline and go, "Oh, well, at least 250,000 young white girls have been raped, largely by Muslim men, at least." And it's like, do you have any actual statistics or citations for that? No, none at all. And this report also goes on the same utter lack of any mythologic, any kind of rigor. It states that in court records and official inquiries, around 87% of those convicted of these group-based child exploitation cases bore distinctively Muslim names. Now, we'll get back to that bit in a moment. But that report cited an article by Christian Concern, which in turn cited another author, or an author, called Peter McLaughlin from Christian Concern. And Christian Concern helped found the Alliance Defending Freedom, a US lobbying group or pressure group that spends most of its time attacking gay and abortion rights, which is quite funny for taking figures from a group that attacks abortion rights and talking about, valuing women. But anyway, McLaughlin himself wrote a book called Easy Meat, and he also happens to have co-authored the white supremacist Tommy Robinson's manifesto. And so that's where it comes from. And so basically you're citing a far-right activist group that routinely attacks gay rights, routinely attacks abortion rights, that's based in the US. How do you... even know that any of those figures are even right, considering they're not exactly impartial. And whilst we're on the subject, cases that bore distinctively Muslim names, what the fuck does that mean? That's not exactly a bar of evidence. Oh, so what? Basically, they looked at names and said, "Well, that guy, his name sounds kind of Muslim, so we'll cite that." That's not that's not evidence. It's not evidence of anything. And in the same vein, the report also states that Dr. Taj Haji, an imam with the Islamic congregation, believes that the true proportion of gang members who are Muslim is around 95%. Again, that is outright based in this figure on the belief of one guy. Like, there's not... Actually, scientific papers are peer-reviewed, and there's a reason for that. And that is to ensure the data or the conclusions that are being espoused are accurate. This is not peer-reviewed at all. And basically, they're just taking this figure from like one imam in Oxford. And as the article that I'm using kind of points out, he's well known for his very odd contrarian opinions. He has campaigned both to ban the burqa and for the identification of UK politicians with familial links to Israel, so work that out. And there have been other groups, watchdog groups, that have also kind of chimed in and have pointed out some things. This is something that Islamophobia UK highlighted, the fact that the framework for this was written by Mark Dury, an Anglican priest, published by Christian Concern months before Lowe cited it. Dury's field is linguistics. His book argues Islam gives non-Muslims three choices: convert, submit, or the sword. He didn't study the gangs and find Islam. He argued Islam is a threat, and then 20 years later, then applied it. So this is someone who has been against Islam for most of his life, and then has latched on to what is a genuine issue for sure, and then saying, "Oh well, because we looked at lots of apparently Muslim-sounding names, that means that there's some kind of mass problem with all Muslims just being sexual predators." And as I kind of alluded to earlier, and as other people have kind of pointed out, like I'm not the first person to make this connection or to kind of talk about it, if we're going to talk about religion that has strong association with sexual predation against minors, then how on earth are we not mentioning things like Catholicism? The Anglican Church in the UK also has been caught out for abusing minors. Like, Christianity also has these issues as well, and they've been caught. And as recently as 2022, a report from the Independent Inquiry for Child Sexual Abuse stated that the investigation into the Roman Catholic Church in England and Wales revealed a sorry story of child abuse, where abusive priests and members of religious orders and institutions preyed on children for a long period of time. Between 1970 and 2015, the Church received more than 3,000 complaints against more than 900 individuals connected to the Church. In the same period, there were 177 prosecutions, resulting in 133 convictions. Since 2016, there have been more than 100 reported allegations of recent and non-recent child sexual abuse every year. The true scale of abuse over a 50-year period is much greater. So at the same time, we've got Christian churches. Like, Catholicism is Christian, the Church of England is Christian, I don't need to point that out, that having is also doing these kind of things. This report, as people have pointed out, actually doesn't make any connections to that at all. They don't cite and saying, well, the rape and exploitation that we see in the Muslim community actually kind of relates to the same patterns that we see in Catholicism, or the same patterns that the Catholic Church, or the same patterns that we've seen in the Church of England. They don't make that comparison at all. They don't even talk about it. And you kind of have to ask yourself why. That's such an obvious comparison to make. It's so obvious I'm making it. That's how obvious it is. Which kind of make you kind of think, well, maybe this report has kind of more of an agenda more than anything else. And as we're also going to go into, what we're going to hear from now is talking about people that did actually submit evidence to this document or this alleged inquiry and were rejected from it. They didn't want to know. The same people that are talking about that we must listen to these people's voices and we must take action, are actually documented of actually ignoring survivors because it didn't suit their agenda. I'll explain why. So, just to kind of recap, the conjecture they kind of arrived at its conclusion that group-based child exploitation is perpetrated chiefly by Pakistani Muslim men against vulnerable white women and girls in communities up and down the country. Now, occasionally they kind of say overwhelmingly white British, but a lot of their phrasing actually just completely ignores the fact that a lot of the people that are victims of child exploitation or rape aren't just white. They're also black, Asian, whatever. And this is something that I see that people on the far right, when you kind of point these things out, immediately go on the offensive and exactly saying, well, you just want to silence survivors because you want to protect Islam for some bizarre reason. And you're not interested in this is a cover-up. No, not at all. We're interested in what's actually happening, not just what people are imagining that's happening. And first of all, if you want to portray a particular group of people as somehow having a particular problem, you actually have to have conclusive evidence to back that up. And saying that if we applied this kind of logic to the logic that this report is doing to, shall we say, Catholics, given the Catholic Church's long history of abuse, then would we not also kind of argue that, oh, well, Catholics, you can't trust them with kids because they just rape them. They just rape them. And the same for members of the Church of England as well, because they've been caught also doing this. So, but that never happens. No one even remotely makes that argument because it's absurd. So, anyway, let's go on to this. So we're going to talk about one survivor called Femi Mohammed, who got herself in touch with I don't know if it's directly with Rupert Lowe, but got herself in touch with this alleged inquiry and reiterated her account had been handled by Lowe's team. And what she says is this: so I'm speaking out in the public interest, not only as a survivor myself, but for all women and girls of colour, black and Muslim, whose voices have been systematically erased from a narrative of justice and accountability. So at first, Femi was encouraged to participate in the inquiry by Sammy Woodhouse. Sammy Woodhouse is a survivor of the Rotherham grooming gangs who went on to lead the inquiry team. Femi even began to submit evidence and sign the consent forms for inclusion. Then, as she puts it, on the 23rd of January, Sammy Woodhouse personally messaged me to invite me to attend the inquiry hearings on the 4th of February 2016, between 2 and 3 p.m. I accepted the invitation on the 24th of January 2026, and Sammy booked my train tickets, emailing them to me on the 26th of January. And as this particular kind of article kind of talks about, the images attached to her social media account proves that the evidence that she claims here proves it is true. And she suddenly found herself and her testimony unwelcome at the inquiry, and this is what she has to say. So within 2 days, everything changed, and I was removed from attending the hearings. On the 28th of January, I received a text message from Sammy Woodhouse asking me to call her. Having spoken to her on numerous occasions, she did not seem like her usual self and failed to provide a reason for my exclusion. Sammy Woodhouse, someone I had a lot of respect for, and it became apparent to me that the decision had come from someone at the top of the inquiry. I felt betrayed and violated, and I was left in a state of confusion, shock, and despair. And so whilst highlighting her own story, she also highlights the broader and deliberate pattern of silencing at play. She said, my removal is not an isolated incident. It is part of a broader pattern of discrimination, racial profiling, and silencing women of colour, especially from female Muslim victims. Within the victim and survivor movement, despite my efforts to bring these issues to light by reaching out to other survivors, I have faced deliberate attempts to suppress my voice and experience. This reflects a disturbing trend where the narrative of sexual exploitation and violence is often confined to a narrow group of victims, driven by those who financially and publicly benefit from our trauma. In this system, it has become big business, where division is created and profit is made from perpetual suffering of victims and survivors. So what she's basically saying is, I went to this inquiry, I submitted my evidence, then kind of out of the blue, they didn't want to know from me anymore. Like all of a sudden what I had to say about it didn't matter. And in reply to her story, another survivor, uh, Corony, I believe that's pronounced, a woman of dual heritage, came forward with her own story. She described the mental health deterioration severely in August 2025. At this time, she was dropped from the inquiry following a personal fallout, again with Sammy Woodhouse, and she added that being suddenly kicked off the inquiry felt like a profound rejection, silencing all over again, echoing the original failures of police, social services, and other authorities who dismissed or ignored us as children. As a mixed-race woman, half white and half Indian, this silencing hit even harder. In my lowest moments, I wonder whether my being brown played a part in the decision to exclude me, adding a layer of suspected racial rejection on top of everything else and deepening old insecurities, but not being seen as a credible victim. Now, she asked Lowe repeatedly and publicly to be allowed to give evidence after she was dropped, but by her own account, she left no reply. Now, Femi continues, the woman that we were talking about earlier, highlights the hypocrisy of this kind of inquiry. She says, this crowdfunding inquiry intended to seek justice for survivors has instead shown how easily women of colour are excluded not only from the process, but from the conversation about justice. MP Rupert Lowe has criticised the government's failing to take white rape gang victims seriously and accused it of anti-white racism, yet the inquiry he chairs has reflected similar discriminatory prejudice against me. It appears that my removal from the inquiry may be linked to my identity as a Muslim woman who was unwilling to compromise her faith, as reflected in an increase of anti-Islamic statements following my exclusion during the inquiry hearings and thereafter. So, according to her testimony, Lowe and his kind of friends demonstrated quite clearly that they are only interested in confronting what they call the causes and characteristics that could be used to whip up Islamophobic and anti-immigrant sentiment. And it's an old story. It's an old tactic. It's been used in America for African American folk who have been accused, African American men are coming to take our women, they're coming to attack them, to rape them. Every other group that is basically not white, or even white or not sometimes, has also been accused of this many times. And Femi concluded that it is clear the inquiry is not interested in the full truth, nor in justice for all victims. It's about maintaining a narrative that aids political ambitions by pandering to a pleasant climate about exploiting emotional sensitivities. Because you would think, if you were genuinely concerned about victims, that you'd want to hear from all victims, not just the ones that helps you peddle your own political agenda or your own political ideology. You would think that if this inquiry was actually serious about it, then they would be very welcoming of people who suffered at the hands of. And as Femi counts as herself, she says, I want to make it abundantly clear that as a victim of a Pakistani individual, I support rape gang victims. However, I will not support the religion of Islam being blamed or demonized for the actions of a Pakistani or Muslim abusers or used to stir up hatred within our society. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. We want to deal with sexual abuse. We want to deal with rape. And the authorities and the police's lack of doing anything about it. I mean, look at the sexual trafficking that happened with Epstein and his islands. None of them have been brought to justice. Most of them were kind of white guys, I'm just going to say. And you would think if this inquiry had any kind of integrity, then they'd be perfectly welcoming to these two victims who had their own stories to tell about how they were victimized. But all of a sudden, they were shut out. And from what they were saying, it's because they didn't want to go along with the narrative. They actually wanted to tell their stories and talk about what happened to them and how do we actually deal with authorities' lack of action on this issue. But what has actually happened is, no, they were shut out because this goes against the argument that white women have been particularly targeted by Pakistani Muslim men. Because they don't fit into that pattern at all, so they were just ignored. And so I've seen a lot of debate around this, a lot of kind of mud hurling, and people and people who have pointed out the real problems with this report, just like, for example, as we kind of repeat again, the fact that this figure comes from nowhere. It is made up. They say, oh, it's just an estimate. But even an estimate has to have some kind of bearing in reality. Like, all they did was just take a figure that had been quoted by some MP some years ago, which came from nothing, and said, oh, well, that is what is happening here. And the fact that a lot of these other kind of figures that they have cited come from far-right Christian groups that have a well-known hatred for anyone that isn't Christian, essentially, and have a very clear kind of political bias, kind of causes problems of, well, who are you citing here? What is your source? And a lot of these sources don't even make sense. And the fact that sexual abuse that's happened in the Roman Catholic Church and in the Anglican Church is not even mentioned. In fact, it's not even discussed in relations to this, is telling. It's telling because that goes against the narrative that they're trying to push. The narrative that all Muslim men, or Pakistani Muslim men anyway, certainly from what they're kind of talking about in this report, are a danger. They're just out to rape white women, even though, as these two people have talked about, they were attacked by a Muslim or Pakistani abuser, and they were silenced. They were not allowed to participate. So the same inquiry that talks about how victims are quote-unquote being silenced by the authorities have themselves very publicly and openly silenced victims because it doesn't go along with their political ambitions and what they want to peddle. We should deal with what is actually happening and not with what people want to happen. Are there Pakistani Muslim men who commit crimes? Yeah, like every other ethnicity on the planet. There's nothing unique about that. I've been a victim of a crime, not a sexual crime, but I've been a victim of a crime, and it was a white guy that did it. Are we all going to? Should I go around and just say, well, all white guys? Yep, one guy committed a crime on me, so ergo, they're all guilty? That's insane, and that's a standard which would never be applied, and indeed isn't applied. But anyway, thank you very much for listening to this video today. I'll catch you later. Goodbye.